Hello and welcome to this primary election debate for Republican candidates for Maricopa County Attorney. This debate is sponsored by Clean Elections, the state's nonpartisan voter education agency. My name is Richard Rellis and I'll be moderating this debate. The format will be a little different from previous debates. We're hosting a 30-minute one-on-one since only one candidate is here participating. The incumbent, Rachel Mitchell, has not accepted our invitation to participate in this debate. Thanks to a partnership with Clean Elections Commission and the Arizona Media Association, we're working to make sure these 2024 debates are the most accessible in Arizona history. That means this conversation and dozens more debates between now and November will air on a long list of local TV stations, radio stations, and digital platforms, including support from local newspapers. It's a shared effort among hundreds of local media brands across Arizona. Transparency is critical here. That's why these debates have been designed with input from a broad group of journalists in Arizona representing both urban and rural communities. Thank you to voters across Arizona who have submitted questions for this debate. We've reviewed all of them to make sure every voice is heard. However, the candidate has not been given advanced access to any of the questions. So I briefly want to outline for our viewers and listeners the roles and responsibilities of the Maricopa County Attorney. The county attorney is the chief prosecutor for the county, responsible for prosecuting felonies that occur in Maricopa County and misdemeanors in unincorporated areas. They also serve as legal counsel for the County Board of Supervisors and all county departments. The office has more than 1,000 employees. And now let's introduce the Republican candidate, Gina Godby, here. Welcome and thank you for being here. You have 2 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you. I appreciate you had taken the time and allowing me to come here today to talk about my candidacy for Maricopa County Attorney. I'm running for office because we are witnessing an epidemic of leniency here in Maricopa County. We've witnessed increased homelessness, shoplifting occurring daily in our neighboring stores, and we have migrant crime that's on the rise from an unsecured border. My name is Gina Godby here. I am a mother, a fourth-generation Arizona native, and I spent the last 28 years serving our community, 25 as a prosecutor with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office and as a bureau chief. The last few years I've served as a crime victims' rights attorney. And I'm so glad that we talked about the importance of the role of a prosecutor, because if you do not have a strong county attorney, that is the only person that files almost every felony case for all of the residents in Maricopa County, whether it's a car theft, a burglary, up to a murder. If the county attorney does not enforce the law and file felonies, nobody else can. And nobody knows that more than the city of Goodyear. You see, a little over a year ago, their community was rocked when a defendant drove through 19 bicyclists, killing 2 and injuring dozens others. When the county attorney refused to file any felony charges and sent those to the city for misdemeanor, there was nothing the city can do. There was nothing the police can do, the mayor or the council. That was one of the main reasons I stepped in this race to run for office. We are not holding offenders accountable. There's too many felonies being turned down to misdemeanors and sent to cities where they're not being monitored. We have expanded liberal diversion policies that have placed our community at risk. And when you have this revolving criminal justice door, you are emboldening defendants, you're demoralizing our law enforcement, and you are creating harm to victims who are not getting the justice that they deserve. I can no longer stand by and watch the status quo and watch victims suffer. That's why I'm running for office. I'm committed to holding offenders accountable, and I'm committed to returning the voice to crime victims, and I would be honored to have your vote.
Thank you. And I guess we'll start with, we'll see how this plays. More of a conversation, I guess, than a back and forth debate. And let's start by, I guess, addressing the person who's not in the room. I'm not a political consultant, but I've talked to a few for my day job, and I guess one would say that an incumbent, a perceived frontrunner, could only lose ground by debating their opponent in a primary. Why do you think the current county attorney, Rachel Mitchell, is not here tonight?
I think the county attorney is not here because my opponent, and it's not personal, I've worked with Rachel Mitchell for over 25 years during my time with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. The difference is policy. It is not personal. But my opponent wants to continue to make the community believe everything is okay, and it's not okay. We have a crisis in our criminal justice system. And my opponent wants to continue just to talk about retail theft and adding judges into IA courts. And the problem with this is these are the same policies that have been in place for decades. There was a retail task force that I sat on over 10 years ago. I have a challenge coin from Target saying that the day that my opponent announced the retail task force, the same day her chief deputy sent an email to those in the office saying nothing's changed, the same attorney's handling it. The only thing different is there's another investigator assigned. So because I know what's happening in the county attorney's office and I can call my opponent out, I think she's avoiding debates with me because she knows that I know what's actually going on, and I feel compelled to bring that to the public's attention because we have real issues in our criminal justice system. Victims are being harmed. Police officers are not being protected, and we have to change course or we're in trouble. We cannot afford 4 more years of going on the status quo and pretending everything is okay because it's not.
And your website has talked about trying to educate citizens about the role of the county attorney's office and sort of building institutional trust. It's a job that you're obviously asking for votes. It's a political job, but it also is a judicial job. How do you balance that political role against the judicial role?
When you say balance the political role against the judicial role, I think this should not be a political position. This should be nonpartisan. It shouldn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. If you committed a crime, you should be held accountable. And if you are a victim of crime, you deserve justice. So when you balance the role, as long as you enforce the law, you do not bring politics into it, but politics should have no play. And it's why I'm concerned where prosecuting agencies across the country and in our state, when they weaponize the prosecutor's office, they do a disservice to our role. Our role is to be the fair administrator of justice. We shouldn't bring politics into that. It should be an assessment of the case, and it shouldn't matter who committed the crime and who the victim is. Everyone should be treated the same, which is why I'm also concerned with the handling of my opponent in the Charles Ryan case. In that case, my opponent gave a sweetheart deal to a political insider, a deal that nobody else in the criminal justice system would have received. And she used an excuse of alcohol that is an excuse, but it's not a legal defense, to try to justify what really was an unjustifiable plea. And as a result, it created an appearance of a two-tiered system. So when you engage in conduct like that, that's how you erode trust in the system, and that is not something that I intend to do going forward. I want to build trust. I want to build transparency. I want to make sure that we work together for an equal and fair county attorney's office for everyone involved. And
you mentioned two-tiered system, and you mentioned the word weaponizing the justice system. Nationally, former President Trump kind of went on the attack on the justice system, saying he thought that his state felony conviction was somehow manipulated by the Department of Justice. How do you see those attacks on the justice system? Is there merit to what Trump has been saying about that prosecution?
I think when you have people who run for office who ran saying that they were going to hold somebody accountable before they even stepped in office, that was a promise to their voters. You also had positions where you have jurisdictions change the law, the statute of limitations, and areas to be able to go after someone. You have a Department of Justice who will go after President Trump for having confidential information, but not Joe Biden. When you have a system that's treating both sides differently, that's where you have problems, and especially to do so 8 years later on the eve of another election is troubling to everybody involved. It is why we have distrust in our system, and anytime you have the distrust in our system, we are already eroding. We have distrust in law enforcement, we have distrust in our systems, and it's something that we have to restore for the future of our country.
Yeah, and I guess I'll mention with the documents, there were special investigations in both. But I guess that is the balance, right? I mean, is it more transparency to voters helps with as a reporter, I would love more transparency. Is it transparency? Is that the answer, or is it not attacking the justice system?
I think it is transparency, but calling out a system where they are treating people different than they've treated historically should be called out. When you have people who are not utilizing their role as a fair administrator of justice, it causes concern. When you have judges, you're supposed to avoid any appearance of impropriety. That's not what we're seeing across the country. We are seeing people with known biases in their family and in their history, and they are not recusing themselves from that case. That is something that we have always stepped aside to avoid any appearance of impropriety, to allow the community to have trust in the system. That has been lacking, and that is what we are seeing that has to change.
The notion of being tough on crime sort of serves as a shorthand. How would you define justice? Is it avoiding plea deals? Is it pleading only to the most serious charge? There's a lot of cases that come through the county attorney's office. What do you do when these cases come your way? How do you filter them through?
You know, I did spent over 25 years there, and 18 years was as a manager approving plea offers all the way up to homicide cases. So there is a role for plea offers in the county attorney's office. Plea offers serve a function. They allow victims to avoid the additional trauma of testifying. They ensure finality of judgment for the victims, and they also save resources. So there is a value, but the key is plea agreements have to be fairly applied to everybody. You have to have policies, and you have to make sure that they're enforced, so one defendant isn't getting a better plea than another defendant who are similarly situated. That is the key. So when you're dealing with plea offers, there will always be plea offers, but you got to make sure that they're fairly imposed. You have to also make sure that currently the policies that are frightening to me, and one of the reasons I'm running, is that we had not just the Charles Ryan that was a lenient plea offer that was that everyone is called to question across the board, because it was something that he got a deal that nobody else got, and the county attorney violated her own written plea offers to give that deal, and as a result, the stip probation, no jail deal for somebody that waved a gun at police officers. She has her own attorneys now who are being dragged into settlement conferences, and every defense attorney wants the same deal for their client, and she's put everybody in a very, very difficult position. But it's not just with those pleas. I have concerns of the lenient pleas for drug offenses. It used to be we've been a treatment first state for over 25 years. I founded helped implement the very first juvenile drug court in 1996. And it used to be that if you had 3 or 4 felonies and you were not getting treatment on your own, that you would go into jail or prison and you would be forced to get treatment. Now we're letting people with 7 and 8 priors. They're not mandating treatment. And as a result, we keep releasing people into the community. And we had that case that just happened several weeks ago with the officer that was stabbed in the neck. You have somebody who was a repetitive offender, who continued to violate the law, who had substance abuse issues and mental health issues that were never treated. And it shouldn't surprise anyone when he then pulled a knife and stabbed an officer. And thank goodness that officer did not die as a result of his injuries. But these are the policies and plea agreements that are being made that have to change. We cannot allow these lenient plea offers. We can't allow the lenient plea offers that are being made in sex offense cases. My opponent keeps talking about how she's a career sex crimes prosecutor. I call on her to release the stats of her deferred registration for sex offenders, because they are not imposing registration as they should in many cases that are upsetting victims and are not protecting this community.
You've mentioned the Charles Ryan case. Let's quickly let our audience know. Charles Ryan, the former head of the Department of Corrections, standoff with Tempe police. He was facing aggravated assault charges, ended up pleading no contest to disorderly conduct instead. Sounds like you're not a fan of that deal. You would have gone to trial, or what would have been the minimum deal you would have accepted?
You know, it didn't have to be a trial. If the Class 2 would have been filed, which is what the police department originally submitted on, that range of prison was anywhere from 10.5 to 21. The county attorney chose to file disorderly instead because even though the officer victim said the gun was pointed at him, they didn't believe it was pointed enough to be an aggravated assault. But even disorderly conduct is a dangerous offense, and it mandates prison. It could have been up to 2 years in prison. So the fact that that you didn't file the ag assault, you file a disorderly conduct, dangerous, then you drop dangerous, then instead of mandating prison even on a non-dangerous or even a no agreements where the judge could have imposed prison and you could have at least given the victims a voice to advocate for it, you agreed to probation and no jail. That is what I'm not a fan on. That was not fair to the victim officers who were police officers that put their lives on the line every day to protect us. And when a gun is pointed at them and they are fearing for their lives, they deserve to have justice.
And the Goodyear bike accident, a driver veers into a bike lane and ends up killing 2 people, ends up being charged with a misdemeanor after the county attorney's office kicked it back, so the most it would get, and Goodyear, your former office, is pursuing the case, but it would only be a misdemeanor. And I guess you're not a fan of that prosecution either. Is it at times worth pursuing a case even if you risk losing, then take a plea and at least ensure some punishment?
You know, in the Goodyear case, you had a defendant who claimed that his steering froze, and they analyzed that vehicle 3 different times and they couldn't find proof of that. This defendant had marijuana in his system, and but he claimed it was from the night before. But the most troubling thing is he didn't brake for over 5.5 seconds. So when you count on that, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, and he drove over 19 bicyclists, killing 2. I don't understand how that wasn't negligence at a minimum. I don't know any law enforcement officer that agreed that wasn't negligence at a minimum. So I am not a fan on it. When you have something like that and you're going to tell this community that all they're going to get is 2 misdemeanor convictions that's not going to give them the justice they deserved, yes, I am troubled. And some of those cases, a jury needs to decide.
On your criticism of Rachel Mitchell's plea deals, including the Charles Ryan case, on a radio show you saying that it involved liberal staff running the office. Is that, and it sounds like you're still speaking to people who work in the office, are these Mitchell appointees she placed, or are you talking about needing to root out, if you get in, longtime staffers who've been at the county attorney's office?
Oh, no. We have some amazing staffers at the county attorney's office, people who I've worked in the trenches with for decades. I'm talking about liberal staffers that are influencing their liberal policies, specifically the dangerous liberal diversion policies that I hope we get time to talk about. When you implement the same dangerous policies that we're seeing in cities like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, that is a concern, and those are policy decisions made by the leadership team at the county attorney's office, and those are the individuals I am talking about. We cannot continue this liberal expansion of diversion for serious offenses. That never occurred. You know, I spent 25 years there. I worked under Rick Romley, under Andrew Thomas, under Bill Montgomery. We never had policies like this in place. And even to expand diversion, where you're offering diversion for cases like robberies, impersonating of police officers, ag assaults on officers, and you make diversion offers even when victims object. Those are the ones that are concerning to me. These are the policies that are endangering our communities and doing a disservice to crime victims.
And let's talk about diversion programs. I mean, I guess one way of looking at them is it will keep certain offenders out of prison, and maybe, although prison is designed to rehabilitate, it doesn't always do that job, and people might get just caught up in a cycle of criminal convictions. How do you manage who should be eligible for diversion programs? Are there populations you think benefit from specialized courts and programs?
I think that diversion is great in areas in the juvenile system. When we're talking about substance abuse and addiction, domestic violence issues where you can get anger management to families and drug treatment to families who need it. It can also be helpful in some minor offenses like shoplifting cases. But when you're talking about serious felony cases like robberies, unlawful flights that we used to mandate a designated felony because we wanted to send a message that you can't flee from police if they're trying to stop you, and then to turn around and give them a diversion. And so the voters understand, and your viewers, diversion means you either do 10 sessions or 20 sessions and your case is dismissed and you have no record. 10 or 20, depending on if you're determined to be a high risk or low risk. And so when you take somebody who commits a robbery, you let them do 10 or 20 sessions and their case is dismissed and they have no record, that is where I'm concerned. And if you look at the county attorney's own data on their website, only 52% of all of their diversion is successful. That means 48% is unsuccessful. And of that 52% that is successful, they are showing recidivism rate in the first 12 months. 15% are rearrested. I think it was 4.4% for new felony submittals. That should concern everybody. This is not a successful diversion program. This is a failure. And you should never allow diversion for people who attack an officer. If somebody will attack an officer, they'll attack anyone. So when you're allowing diversion on these serious cases that involve victims, and you are placing people on diversion even when crime victims come and object and want to talk about the harm that was done to them, and the county attorney is ignoring those voices and giving them diversion anyway, that is where we've gone too far, and we have to rebalance the scales to hold offenders accountable.
And I guess, there's a couple other topics to move. Well, given the time, let's ask you about abortion. The Arizona Attorney General has said she would use her supervisory authority to block county attorneys from prosecuting any abortion cases. Would you want the power to prosecute cases involving abortions that you believe violate Arizona law?
The Attorney General has no authority to prevent the county attorney from enforcing the law. So I'm not going to allow the Attorney General to tell me how to do my job if I am blessed to get the job. And when you're talking about abortion specifically, that is an area where the voters are still determining what Arizona is going to look like in a post-Roe world. We have, is it the 15-week ban? Is it going to be the more expansive, almost abortion on demand that's going to be before the voters in November? We will decide that. But what all of the voters should understand is my role as the county attorney is going to be to enforce the law and the will of the people, and whatever that may be once it is determined. And so when it comes to abortion, just know I am not going to substitute my judgment, whether it be abortion or any other category of laws, for yours. You get to choose what the law is going to be, and my job is to enforce your will.
There have been concerns about elections. Maricopa County has been at the center of that locally and nationally. In 2022, you said there were questions that still needed to be answered. Do you have those answers? Are you confident that this election, the procedures that will be done for this election, are up to snuff?
I am confident with this election that we are aware, and if there are any concerns with policies, people are going to be addressing those proactively and not waiting to the last minute. I'm also confident that we're going to learn from the long lines and the issues that continue to happen on election day so that we can make sure that we restore the faith and confidence in our election with all of the voters out there.
You were not a fan of the sanctions the county went against Kari Lake. Was that because you thought the case had merit, or just you thought sanctions were inappropriate?
I think you should never impose sanctions for people who want to question the integrity of the office. That silence critics, and it's improper. And I also wasn't a fan of members of my opponent's team who decided, we all saw the lines. We saw the issues with drawer 3 and whether to put in drawer 3 or not, and whether Sharpies could be used or not used. There was a lot of panic and there was a lot of confusion, and I think it was inappropriate for members of my opponent's team to criticize and blame that on the voters because they chose to exercise their constitutional right and vote on Election Day. Everyone has that right, and that's something that should never have happened.
And briefly, because I want to make sure you have enough time for your closing statement. For voters who wish to reclaim this office for Republicans, last time you lost the primary 57% to 42%. What do you think would be the difference this time?
This time, the power of the incumbency was hard last time, and I was new getting in the race, but I have been working to get into the certain areas of the county that I didn't get to last time. And the more my voice is heard, I had the winning message. I had the right message, the support of law enforcement. Last time I had 90% of all law enforcement endorsing me. It was just hard to get that message out to the public. And this time I have a wonderful team and a great grassroots effort. And together we are letting the public know what is at stake in this election, and we are going to win on the messaging. I'm
going to try to sneak one more in about 30 seconds. We're seeing the first Gilbert Goons cases be prosecuted. Do you think that some of those are plea deals, obviously? Do you think that's enough? Very briefly.
I'm very concerned with the Gilbert Goons because we should have been in that community from the beginning. And my opponent, one of the worst things when that community was at crisis and these juveniles were afraid, and we know of at least 2 homicides connected to that case that we're hearing about. When this community was in crisis, we should have been in there trying to encourage our youth to come forward, empowering the bystanders. The last thing that we needed to do was to be lecturing the community and the parents and dismissing any law enforcement questions on the Gilbert case. I pledge that I'm going to be present in that community when the crisis arises, and I will be using plea offers when appropriate to send a strong message of deterrence to say that's not going to be tolerated.
Excellent. And I will read this slowly to give you time to sip some water if you wish, because it's now time for closing statements. And Ms. Godbehere, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Are you tired of lawlessness and the revolving criminal justice door? Do you believe it's time to return to enforcing our laws and holding offenders accountable? Well, voters, you have a choice. You can go with my opponent who's going to continue the status quo and pretend everything's okay, or you can choose a conservative fighter, someone who's not running for power, who's running to make a difference, someone who wants to end the liberal policies that have taken root under my opponent's watch and hold violent and repetitive offenders accountable, someone who's going to restore the voice for crime victims. I will stand by law enforcement, those who protect us 24/7. Law enforcement officers are going to be your first line of defense. I pledge to be your last line of defense. I will do everything in my power to protect this community, for our families, for our children, but I need your help. Please learn more of my candidacy and join me in this fight at GinaForJustice.com. Thank you.
And thank you. That's the time we have for Gina Godbehere, Republican candidate for Maricopa County Attorney. As a reminder, the Arizona primary election is July 30. Early voting starts July 3. All registered voters can participate in the primary, including independents. A lot of officers are up for election this year, so we'll keep hosting these debates or monologues through the summer and fall. Go to azmedia.org to see a list of every local media partner, plus upcoming debates and where you can find them on TV, radio, and digital platforms. You can also see the full debate schedule, learn more about clean elections, and submit questions for future debates at azcleanelections.gov. On behalf of our partners at Clean Elections, the Arizona Media Association, Reister, and Bitfire Studios, thanks for watching and listening.